I think what's important to note is that scapegoating, while it feels very cathartic and it feels like it's absolving you of accountability when you're doing it, it almost always creates worse problems than it offsets. And I guess what I mean is, these stereotypes of Jewish people being like, controlling all the finances and stuff. It's actually a relic of, I don't know if it was Roman times or what. It like lasted a little beyond that. But basically, they didn't want Jews to be able to make money, but there was one place that they could make money, and that was through banks and interest. Okay, through usury, which in many religions is actually forbidden. But they basically tried to close off any avenues for Jewish people to make money, and what they did was, it actually really enriched those communities. And then you got this unfortunate stereotype of like Jews being these greedy, miserly people with like who control all the money and the resources, okay? That we're still dealing with today, unfortunately. So there's that. And then you get World War One, and I'm not saying those two are, caused each other. I'm just citing the scapegoat historic examples here of like why this always never works. like World War One, everyone had lost a lot, killed a lot of people. Nobody gained anything from that war basically, and they made it Germany's problem. They made it. They're like, okay, none of us gained anything out of this, and now we're all in a lot of fucking death, and we just achieved a lot of death and destruction, not much else, and also debt. Because unfortunately, to get people to care on those big scales, who get to decide who's having war, they care more when money is involved. Unfortunately, so they shoved all that debt onto Germany, and what did Germany do? They took all that scapegoating and all that responsibility, and they funneled it back to the Jewish community and said, these are the people who are responsible for why you're suffering in the world and why our economy is failing and blah, blah, blah. They're hoarding all the wealth and the resources. Skip. By the way, New York was supposed to take the Holocaust families and all the people who were leaving Germany, and they refused. So, anyone who's standing Israel, who's like in these, Congress and stuff, it's like, it's so funny to me. Like New York, it was actually your job to do that, but you said no. So, and then Britain drew up the things for Palestine and said, here, go over here. And, the scapegoating of Palestinians is, boy, it really does give what they were doing to Jews a run for their money, because now you got a population of, theoretically, allegedly Jewish people. Not all of them technically have DNA, because there was actually a moment in time, even though Judaism is not known for proselytizing, there was a point in time in Eastern Europe where there was. So many of them actually do not even have roots, but we're not going to talk about the problematic aspects involved in that. Anyway, Palestinians, they're not real or something. No, don't worry. It's their fault that Jewish people face the threat of existence from all sides. Everyone hates them, whether this is true or not. They inundate their populace with this rhetoric, right? They inundate, like, even before they're out the womb, because their mothers are hearing that too, like the whole world hates you. You have to, the way you compensate for that is just you embody a honey badger or a little toy dog, and you're aggressive to everybody to make up for your lack of size. Everyone's an enemy who like challenges you in any way. Like it really, the fear, that the hate is really stemming from an intense, unrestrained fear. That is just like they pour gasoline all over that shit. And really a lot of the anti-Jewish sentiments is specifically born from the presence of Zionism that didn't really exist before, in Arab populations at least. Obviously Europe is a different story in that regard. But again, you have this, and they won't call them Palestinian, because that would be legitimizing them, right? So they have in their mind that all Arabs are the same. Oh, they're just Arabs. They do the same thing that was done to their ancestors of like, oh yeah, they're just Arabs. Why can't they just go to other Arab lands? Like the most racist shit you've ever heard. So they will never call them Palestinian. They'll call them Arab, because to them they're the same, right? And there is like a generational wound there that, again, they are offsetting and scapegoating Palestinian people up. For the stuff that happened to them, they're putting onto Palestinians again. You see how, like, when you pass the buck of responsibility on and on and on, it only just kind of creates this momentum of horrific and atrocity and inhumane violence that actually ultimately achieves nothing. Because I guarantee you Israel will not exist here pretty shortly. And it's specifically because of all that it's doing to ensure its survival. It's getting to the point where it's absolutely counterintuitive to itself. And yet, like, Palestinians aren't doing anything. I mean, they do their best, but they don't have the powers behind them that Israel does, right? Like, they have a lot of really rich corporations, like, basically funding them that have allowances that surpass whole nations. So there's that explanation. But also economically, they're not doing well. They're also taking down these corporations with them, and so are also the empire supporting them. Like, it's absolutely going to destroy America. It will, because America has funded and founded itself upon a whole legacy of genocide and slavery. And a lot of its success is the fact that they made a money-making pyramid scheme out of debt, and they're like, what, $35 trillion in debt, and that's why they're basically owned by corporations. It's not that the government is influencing things in a bad way because it's the government. It's that it's basically been privatized, and there's reasons they don't want it to be shown to the public. All the financial curry favors, whatever. They're not going to tell you where all the tax money goes. Like, if you could see the sheet, if the government was forced to like put down absolute everything they spend money on and who they had meetings with and so on and so forth and lobby money and stuff, like, absolutely, you think the public would support that? No. But it doesn't matter, because debt is still a deficit. It doesn't matter if in the short term it makes you money. It's still, if people continue not being able to pay it back, where do you think it ends up back again? It ends with the people who basically sped up and accelerated the debt because no one else can pay for it. So anyway, yeah, I'm just saying, spiritually too, this victimizer paradigm that humanity, it's so important that we move out of this, because if you're occupying one role, you can't not exist without the other role, and that's a problematic place to be. Because even if you're not really a victim, like, the victim mentality, it just has to feel real. It doesn't have to be real. You can feel persecuted even if you're not persecuted. Like Israelis, for example, have this problem. They are inundated with this. You are always going to be a victim in the world. In the story of Earth, you're always going to be the victim. You're always going to be the ones who are persecuted. So in their head, that's the appeal of adopting the victimizer role, right? It's like, well, we don't want to be this role. So we can't get ourselves outside of the idea that this paradigm has to exist no matter what. Like, it's just the way of the world, which it's not. We created that paradigm. It doesn't have to exist. Like, they need to have that opposition to know themselves. And without that opposition, they could not know themselves, and they could not. And that's ultimately why they need Palestinians, because I honestly don't know that they would have an identity outside of that. Like, I really don't. Like, even though they want to like conquer all of the Middle East or something, it's very a unique brand of white settler that is very removed from Jewish identity in my mind. Like, But that's the thing. That's why people choose to be victimizers, because they think, well, someone's going to take that role anyway. So I would rather not be the victim. So I have to be the victimizer. And that's essentially what happened with Israeli Jews. They think, I don't want to be a victim, so I'm going to be the victimizer before you can be the victimizer. And that's, how you end up in this. And, essentially, the United States did like spiritually secede from Hitler, honestly. Like, their issue was not they're killing Jewish people. Their issue was they knew Hitler was getting involved in like weaponizing on a global scale occult shit and stuff. And they're like, oh, well, somebody in the world is going to adopt this role, so it should just be us. Instead of like making moves to make sure nobody does that, they're like, we should just be that role instead. Again, they're like, well, we don't want to be the victim of that paradigm. We'd rather be the victimizer. So it wasn't necessarily done out of the goodness of their heart to stop Hitler, okay? It just wasn't. It never was, okay? It came from a fear that was interested in maintaining its dominance and survival, basically. And, what they'll never tell you is that they actually just absorbed a lot of the Nazi scientists for themselves. And, the States has always been incredibly good at its marketing. That's really the only way they can have a voluntary military the size it is, They're really good at exporting the idea of America to the world. And that's about it. Because I would actually argue their biggest export is not resources, it's Hollywood. And that's why you see a lot of Michael Bay films basically glorify and romanticize the military. That's why they're known for explosions and stuff. They actually have like access to real military shit like that. I mean, obviously CG, right? Like, I don't know that they are always using real explosions, obviously, but they have access to this equipment. They have deals, military industrial complex. And that's actually the reason too, that it's not just fascism that the police are heavily militarized. It's literally because the budget that goes to the military is so overinflated, they basically have to buy weapons they don't need. And then they're like, okay, just give it to the police departments or whatever, Now we're starting to see them hurting because they didn't get the memo that you attract more flies with honey than you do vinegar. And they would rather make enemies of everybody instead of friends. And because they couldn't stop bitching about China. China's basically choking off their hold over precious metals and, things that you need to make weapons in the first damn place, okay? And that was really kind of a big source of their power was just this basically essentially privatized military. It's federal, but a lot of their stuff is from private companies. You know what I mean? So, and what does this have to do with all these other groups like BlackRock and stuff? And I will tell you exactly. If you're confused about what product BlackRock sells or Vanguard or any of these other places, I will tell you. How do you guarantee a market for something? How can you do that? You have to create the conditions that would lead to that demand, right? You would have to artificially create scarcity in order to guarantee market. So what they sell is market demand. And that's a nicer way of saying they sell disruption. They sell war. They sell coups. They sell, that's it. That's how they create and guarantee markets for people who don't actually want to earn their income. They create demand by impoverishing countries and creating a basically slave standard of labor exploitation, etc. So anyway, we kind of digressed a little bit here, but all that to say is when you get in this energy of scapegoating and you're always blaming somebody else for everything, right? Even me to an extent, I have to take ownership of the fact that I have to be the change I wish to see in the world, and I can't just keep using tech oligarchs as an excuse why I can't make it better. I'm going to make it better without them because honestly, they're not with it. So anyway, but the thing is that it's just, I see this with conservatives in the United States and evangelicals. It's just so much easier to blame the poor Mexican man for why everything's so bad because it's more accessible. The idea that you could just go and beat them up is just more accessible to them. If you tell them, no, it's this billionaire mostly, who lives on a private island somewhere, I don't know. They can't physically go and beat them up. So in their head, they've already disempowered themselves, and that's too discouraging. So the thing that empowers them is offsetting the blame to a more vulnerable populace, okay? And you see this with the trans community, which LGBT, actually, even gay people have this really awful problem where they are very discriminatory against trans people. Because there's always, the passing the buck thing, it never stops. It never stops. There's always, well, if it weren't for you, I would be better off. And again, while it might feel temporarily and briefly empowering in that moment, I promise you that this scapegoating, even as far as propaganda is concerned, okay, the scapegoating almost always, if not entirely always, creates much bigger problems than it offsets because you didn't actually get rid of the problem. You just moved it somewhere else for it to accrue more problems. And it's going to come back because gravity works. And the pendulum, if you can't get out of that paradigm where you have to push somebody down, and then they eventually feed into the energy of pushing you back, and then you push them back, and you push. That momentum eventually gets so large, the next push that comes at you, you can't recover from, okay? And that's the thing. If you can't get out of that karmic redistribution of the pendulum swing over and over again, you're just not gonna be okay. You are not gonna overcome any real adversity because you spent so much of your time offsetting it to another population group. And that doesn't get rid of the problem. It just makes everyone miserable, including you. So anyway,